There was a looking-glass in the small room under the eaves, and someone had turned it to face the wall. It hung there in its plain wooden frame with its silvered back to the room, and the cloth that had once covered it lay folded on the washstand as though the folding had been done with great care by a person who did not wish to seem afraid. The maid who cleaned the room had learnt not to move it. The glass stayed as it was, watching the plaster, and the woman who slept beneath the eaves lived her days without once looking at herself. And this was the first true thing anyone might have known about Eleanor Ashby, had anyone thought to look. She was 29, and she had learned to enter a room the way a candle flame leans away from a draught. She kept to the side of things. She chose the chair set back from the fire, the corner where the light did not reach, the half of the corridor that lay in shadow. It was not shyness, though the world had decided to call it that, and it was easier to let the world call it what it liked. It was a habit built plank by plank over 3 winters, and by now it held her weight without a sound. The left side of her face was smooth and ordinary, a pale oval with a grey eye and a brow that had once been called fine. The right side was not. The skin there had been burned, and had healed the way burned skin heals, drawn and shining in some places, and roughened in others, pulling at the corner of her eye and the edge of her mouth, so that when she was tired the whole of that side seemed to wear a small permanent grief. In firelight it looked worse. In candlelight it looked worse still, for a single flame throws shadow into every seam. She had learnt this the hard way, at a dinner table long ago, watching a footman's hand go still upon the wine and not begin again for a very long moment. The fire had happened at the house of the Harcourts, where she had been governess to a bright and clumsy little girl named Grace. It had come up through the nursery floor on a February night with no warning anyone ever agreed upon afterward, and Eleanor had gone back into the smoke for the child when the corridor was already a wall of moving orange, and she had carried Grace out down the servants' stair with the girl's face pressed hard into her neck, and her own hair alight, and her own cheek against the burning frame of the door. Grace had not so much as a mark on her. She had grown up, Eleanor had heard, to be a great beauty. Eleanor had carried the fire on her cheek for the rest of her life. For a fortnight the Harcourts had wept and thanked her and called her the bravest creature in England, and Mr. Harcourt had stood at the foot of her sick-bed, with his hat crushed in his hands, and told her she should want for nothing while he lived. Then the burns began to heal into what they would become, and the guests came again for the season, and Mrs. Harcourt found that her friends did not know where to rest their eyes at tea, and that a governess who drew the gaze was a governess who drew remark. There was a quiet conversation in the morning-room one afternoon. There was a purse of money, 3 years of wages given all at once, and a letter of character so warm it might have belonged to a saint, and a carriage ordered to the coaching-inn for the following morning. No one raised a voice, no one was cruel. That was the part Eleanor had never afterward found the words for. No one was cruel, and yet she had been sent away all the same, dressed up in gratitude so prettily that everyone in the house might feel it had been kindly done, and she had gone out through the servants' door because the front hall was full of callers, and had not looked back at the windows. So it was that on a grey afternoon in the last week of December she came to Ellsworth Hall on the Yorkshire moors, where the road ran out into snow, and the snow ran on into a white nothing under a sky the colour of pewter. The hall stood where the land began to rise, a great dark house of blackened stone with too many windows and too few of them lit, and rooks turned above the chimneys in a slow unbothered wheel, as though they had been set there to keep watch, and had long since stopped expecting anything to happen. The carriage brought her up the drive between bare limes with the snow squeaking under the wheels. She looked at the house, and the house looked back at her out of its dim glass, and something in her that had been braced for a long time eased by the smallest degree, because a house so shuttered against the light would surely have little use for faces. She had come to be a reader and companion to the Dowager Duchess of Ellsworth, who was losing her sight. This detail had been written to her in the agent's careful hand, as though it were an apology, a lowering of expectation. A reason a lady in Eleanor's position ought to accept a post that better-placed women had refused. Eleanor had read the letter 3 times before she understood that it was, to her, very nearly a mercy. Here was a great lady who would not flinch. Here was a mistress who would never once, across a whole winter of afternoons, look up from the page and let her gaze catch and stumble on the ruin of a young woman's cheek. She had written her acceptance the same evening, and posted it before she could think better of wanting something so plainly. The dowager received her in a long room where the curtains were half drawn and a fire burned low. She was a small upright woman of some years past 70, with white hair dressed high, and a face that had been handsome and was now merely fierce, and she held her head at the particular tilt of a person who has learned to listen for what she can no longer clearly see. Her eyes found the middle distance and stayed there. When Eleanor curtsied and gave her name, the old woman turned toward the sound and considered it with her whole attention, the way another woman might have studied a face. "You have a low voice." The dowager's chin came up a fraction. "I cannot abide a reader who chirps." The last one chirped like a hedge full of sparrows, and I sent her back to the agent within the month. "Come nearer, girl, and let me hear you breathe." I judge people entirely by their breathing now. It is remarkable how much a person will tell you by the way they draw breath in a strange room. It is the one thing they never think to arrange. Eleanor came nearer and stood where she was bid. The old lady's clouded gaze passed across her without snagging, and there was such a plain and blessed indifference in it that Eleanor felt her shoulders come down from where they had been living, up near her ears, for 3 years. You breathe like someone waiting to be told to leave. The dowager settled back against her cushions, apparently satisfied. "Well, you may stop. I have buried a husband and 2 brothers, and I mean to bury my physician next. And I want a voice by my fire that does not tremble. Read to me. There, the book by your hand. Start anywhere at all. I have read every one of them, and remember none of it, which the physician calls a tragedy and I call an economy. For it means I may enjoy the same book twice a winter and never spend a shilling more." So Eleanor took up the book and read, and her voice did not tremble, and the winter light failed slowly beyond the half-drawn curtains until the words swam, and she had to lean toward the fire to see them. The dowager did not once interrupt her. When at last Eleanor closed the book, the old woman sat quiet a moment, and then gave a single small nod, as though a matter of some importance had been decided in her favour, and told her she might go and find her supper, and that she was to present herself again at 10 in the morning, and not a minute past, for the mornings were when the pain in her eyes was least, and she liked to spend the good hours well. Of the Duke himself Eleanor heard a great deal, and saw nothing at all in those first days. The servants spoke of him the way people speak of weather that has spoiled a harvest, with a lowered voice and a kind of resigned respect. He was at home, they said, but he was not at home to anyone. He kept the west rooms and the library, and he walked out on the moor in all weathers with only the old dog for company, and he had ordered years ago that the great chandeliers in the state-rooms were never to be lit, so that the hall went about its evenings by single candles and banked fires, and the footman had learnt every turn of every stair in the dark. He had come back from the war a different man, Mrs. Ferris the housekeeper aloud, and then would say no more, pressing her lips together as if the rest were a thing she had promised someone not to tell, and looking into the fire until whoever had asked thought better of asking again. He had been at Waterloo. That much even Eleanor could have guessed, for the whole country carried that name in its mouth that decade like a stone under the tongue. His younger brother had gone out with him, a laughing boy of 20 by every account, and had not come back, and the Duke had carried what was left of him a long way across a ruined field before he understood there was no use in it, and he had come home to Yorkshire with a sabre scar laid open from his left brow to his cheekbone, and a left hand that would never again fully close, and he had shut the doors of Ellsworth and let the rooks keep the sky. He was 35 and looked older, and the county had decided, on the strength of his silence and his shuttered windows, that he was cold, and had said so at enough dinners that the saying had hardened into a fact no one bothered any longer to test. Eleanor understood cold. She understood a great deal about the shapes people took on when the world had looked at them once too long and once too unkindly, and how those shapes hardened over the soft thing beneath, and how the world then blamed the person for the shape it had pressed them into. She did not expect to meet him, and did not wish to. Companions and dukes moved in different weathers under the same wide roof, and she was content to keep to the dim edges of the house where she had always lived, and to spend her mornings reading to a fierce, blind old woman who had, for whatever reason of her own, decided to be kind. She met him at night, in the library, in the dark. It was near a week into her stay, and she had not been able to sleep, and she had gone down for a book to have ready for the dowager on the morrow, carrying a single candle through the cold and sleeping house. The library was a long high room smelling of leather and cold ash, and the ghost of old pipe smoke, and she had thought it empty. She had set her candle on the great table, and gone along the shelves with her finger against the spines, and it was only when she turned that she saw him, a darker shape in the deep chair by the dead hearth, quite still, watching her with the patient attention of a man who has been awake a long time in the dark, and has stopped expecting company to come and find him there. Her first act was the one her body had made 1,000 times over. She turned so that the ruined side of her face was away from him and toward the shadow, a movement so smooth and so old that she was not even aware of having chosen it. Her second act was to reach for the candle to carry it away and give him back the solitude she had broken into. "Leave it." His voice came out of the dark low and unhurried, roughened by long disuse, as though he did not often trouble to use it. "You came for a book. Take your time. I am not using the room for anything a candle would spoil." She stopped with her hand near the flame and did not lift it. "I did not know you were here, Your Grace. I would not have disturbed you. You have disturbed nothing. Sit if you like, or do not." He shifted in the chair, and the little candle threw its glow only so far, and she could make out no more of him than the pale line where the scar crossed his brow and the gleam of a watching eye. He was looking at her. She was certain of it, and braced for it, and then the bracing had nowhere to go, because he did not do the thing that everyone did. His gaze did not catch and stumble and hurry away. It simply rested on her, level and unafraid, the way a man might look at a landscape, or at a fire, or at anything at all that he did not think required an apology for existing. "You are my mother's new reader." It was not quite a question. "She likes you. She told me you breathe like a frightened horse, but read like a person who has actually understood the sentence, which from her is very nearly a proposal of marriage." Something that in another man might have been the ghost of amusement moved through the dark and was gone. Do not let her work you to the bone. She will try. She is bored, and boredom in that woman is a weapon she will turn on anyone within reach. Eleanor found, to her own considerable surprise, that her mouth had curved. It felt strange on her face, the smile, on the good side and the ruined side alike, a muscle little used. "I will guard myself, Your Grace. Take the cowper if you mean to put her to sleep. Third shelf, to your left, the green binding." He settled back into the dark. She pretends to despise it, which is precisely how you will know it works. And then he let her be, offering nothing more, filling nothing, and she took the green book down and gathered her candle and went to the door. There she paused because she felt she owed him something for the plainness of his looking, some small coin returned for a thing he had given without seeming to know he gave it. "Thank you, Your Grace." She kept her hand on the cold door. For the light. There was a silence behind her in the dark room. Then his answer came. Quiet. It is only a candle. But she thought there was a note in it held a moment too long. Some weight settled on the small ordinary word that it was not built to carry, and she went up the stairs turning it over and did not sleep for thinking of it. After that they met the way two solitary people meet in a large house, by accidents that grow steadily less accidental. She found him in the library on other nights, and she stopped fleeing at the sight of him, and he stopped pretending to be asleep. He did not fill the silences. This was the first thing she came truly to prize in him, for she had spent 3 years among people who filled silences the way one stuffs a rag against a draught, hurriedly and with anything to hand, and every stuffed silence had been a small way of telling her that her quiet made them uneasy, that a person like her ought at least to have the decency to chatter. The Duke let quiet be quiet. He would read by the fire, and she would read in the chair across from it, and the flames would settle and shift in the grate, and a whole hour would pass in which neither of them said a single word, and it was the most companionable hour she had known in a decade. The dog attached itself to her in the second week. He was an ancient deerhound named Bracken, grey about the muzzle and slow and stiff in the hind legs, and he had been the Duke since before the war, and had waited out the whole of the war on the moor and by the door with a patience that had apparently used up the last of his allotted trust in the world, for he would go to no one now. He went to Eleanor. He came into the dowager's room one grey afternoon while she read, and he stood in the doorway a long moment considering her out of his cloudy old eyes, and then he crossed the entire floor at his slow deliberate pace, and lay down against her feet with a groan like a door on a rusted hinge, and set his heavy grizzled head upon her shoe. The dowager, who could hear a great deal that she could not see, went very still in her chair. That is Bracken. Her voice had dropped, as though she feared to frighten something off. He does not do that. He has not done that in years. Not for me, not for the girl before you, not for anyone in this house but my son, and he does it for my son, only because the two of them are too stubborn to admit to another living creature that they need it. Her clouded eyes turned toward the small sound of the dog's breathing. Well, he has decided about you, and he is a far better judge of character than I am, and I am a very good judge of character indeed. Eleanor put her hand down into the wiry warmth of the dog's neck, and felt something in her chest ache and give way a little. It had been a long time, longer than she liked to count, since anything living had chosen to lean its whole weight against her without first taking careful stock of her cheek and deciding whether it could bear to. She learned the shape of the Duke's days without ever meaning to. He rose before the light and walked out onto the moor with Bracken heaving along behind him, and he came back with snow melting in his dark hair and his boots ruined and the cold living in the wool of his coat. He read a great deal and slept, by every sign, very little. He suffered from headaches that came on with bright light, a legacy of the wound, so that the shuttered dimness of the whole house was not entirely the black grief the county had imagined it, and Eleanor, who had made a long and private study of the ways a person may arrange a house in order to hide in it, recognised in him a fellow architect of shadow. They were, the two of them, both builders of dim rooms. She had learned to put out the light so that no one need be troubled by her face. He had learned to keep the light out so that his damaged eyes could bear the length of a day, and his damaged self could bear the weight of the world. They had come to the same shadow by different roads, and neither of them had ever once said so aloud, and both of them knew it, and the knowing sat between them in the dark library like a third and easier companion. He began to bring her small things. This was done so carelessly, so entirely in passing, that it took her some time even to understand that it was being done at all, and longer still to understand that it was being done on purpose. A book left upon the hall table with her name in his hand upon a folded slip, and nothing else written there. A branch of witch hazel carried in from the frozen garden, and set in a plain jar of water at her place, at the small table where she took her meals, its thin yellow threads of flower giving off their faint, clean medicinal scent in the dead middle of the year. And no card with it, and no mention made, and when she thanked him, he looked genuinely baffled and remarked that the gardener must be getting above himself and would have to be spoken to. And then, in the third week, a new lamp for the dowager's room, an oil lamp with a frosted shade that threw a soft and even light into every corner, with no cruel single naked flame in it anywhere, and Eleanor understood the whole of it the moment she lit the thing that first evening, understood exactly what it was and why it had come. And she had to sit down on the nearest chair, with her hand pressed flat against the cool tabletop until the room steadied. He had noticed. That was the marvel of it, the thing she turned over half the night. He had noticed the very thing she had spent years believing perfectly invisible, her whole small silent science of shadow and turned cheeks and chosen corners. And he had answered it, not with pity, which she could have borne because she had grown a thick skin against pity, but with a lamp that let her read at the old woman's side without once having to hide, a soft light with no shadow in it to deepen the seams of her face. It was the most private gift she had ever been given, because it named a wound no one had ever named to her, and it healed nothing, and it changed everything. She lit it every evening after that. She never once told him that she understood what it was, and she thought from the care with which he never mentioned it either, that he preferred it so. The good weeks did not last, for good weeks in a great house are lived entirely at the pleasure of the people who own the great house. And in the second week of the new year, Lady Sabine Woad came to Ellsworth with her mother and 3 trunks, and a settled expectation of shortly becoming its mistress. She was 23 and very beautiful, with the confident golden looks of a girl who has been told she is beautiful since before she could walk, and has arranged her entire understanding of the world around the fact of it. She was also an heiress, and the estate, Eleanor came to gather in the way one gathers such things below the stairs, was no longer what it had been. There were mortgages the old Duke had left behind him, and repairs the roof cried out for after every storm, and 100 small quiet hungers that a house of that size and age develops in a hard decade, and Lady Sabine's fortune would answer every one of them and leave a good deal over. The match had been half arranged between the 2 families for years, spoken of as a settled thing that wanted only the Duke's word to complete it, and the Duke had put off giving that word through 3 winters, with the flat immovable patience he gave to everything he did not wish to do. Lady Sabine had at last grown tired of being put off. She had come, her every gesture made plain, to be waited for no longer. She saw Eleanor on the first evening, and did not, at first, see her at all, in the way of great beauties who classify a plain and shabby woman as furniture at a glance, and move their attention onto whatever in the room might reflect them back more kindly. It was only at dinner on the second night, when Eleanor was summoned to read a letter aloud to the dowager at the table, and the branch of candles stood full upon her face, that Lady Sabine looked at her properly, and her lovely features performed the entire familiar journey Eleanor knew by heart and could have named in the dark. The little arrest, the widening of the eyes, and then the swift and practised descent of a mask of gracious pity, laid down smoothly over something a great deal colder underneath it. Good heavens! She spoke to her mother, but she did not trouble to speak so low that the table could not hear. The poor creature! However did she come by such a face? One does hope she is generally kept from the front of the house when there are guests to consider. It is a great deal to ask of a person, at dinner, to be easy over such a thing. She turned the smile then upon Eleanor directly, a wide and warm and lovely smile with a long white winter standing behind it. You must not mind me, my dear. I only ever think of others, It is quite my failing. It cannot be pleasant for you, being stared at so. I should hate it above all things in the world. I do feel for you." The table had gone quiet in the particular way tables go quiet. The dowager, who could not see the smile but had heard every word of it and the little poisoned tale it dragged behind, drew breath to answer. It was her son who answered first. "Miss Ashby reads to my mother." His voice was very even and very cold, the exact cold the county had named him for these 3 years, and Eleanor understood in that instant that the county had never once heard that cold turned in the defence of another living soul. "She does it better than anyone who has ever held the post in this house. My mother's comfort is the first business of Ellsworth, and always has been, and always will be while I am its master. Miss Ashby will sit at the front of this house, and read at this table, and go wherever she pleases within these walls, and anyone who finds that a great deal to ask of a dinner is very welcome to dine elsewhere." He had not raised his voice by so much as a hair. He had not once looked away from Lady Sabine's face while he spoke. The inn at the foot of the valley is an excellent one. It is 7 miles. The road is good. The silence after that had a wholly different texture to it. Lady Sabine's colour rose in a slow tide, and her lovely smile held on by main force alone, and her mother laid a warning hand upon her daughter's arm. And after a moment the whole thing was papered over the way such moments are always papered over at good tables, by someone remarking brightly upon the excellence of the soup. But a thing had been said that could not now be unsaid. Eleanor sat through the rest of the reading with her burned cheek turned bravely toward the branch of candles, reading the letter in a low and steady voice that did not tremble, and under the table Bracken pressed his old weight harder against her feet, as though he too had understood, and she did not once look at the Duke, because she did not in the least trust what her face would do if she let herself look at him. She should have been simply glad. She was glad, and she was also something else entirely, something that frightened her far more than any cruelty of Lady Sabine's could have done, because she had felt her heart turn clean over in her breast at the sound of a man standing up in a bright room to defend her. And she knew with the clear cold certainty of a woman who has taught herself hard lessons exactly how the story would end if she permitted her heart to go on turning over like that. He would marry the heiress. He must marry the heiress. The roof must be mended and the mortgages paid, and dukes did not marry their mothers' scarred companions anywhere outside of the tales that servant girls told one another over the winter mending. She had spent 3 whole years teaching herself patiently to want nothing, and she had grown very good at it, and Lady Sabine had come and undone the entire patient labour of it in a single evening. Because now Eleanor knew what it was to be defended, and she would never again be able to pretend to herself that she did not want it more than breath. Lady Sabine, for her part, was not a girl to forgive an insult delivered before witnesses, and she was clever in the narrow way of people whose cleverness has only ever been spent upon the getting of their own way. She could not strike at the Duke, whom she still meant to marry. So she set herself instead, with great patience and a great show of sweetness, to strike at Eleanor, and she chose her ground with care, for she chose the one thing Eleanor could not defend, which was also the one thing that everyone in a room could see. It was done by small means over the following days. A mirror appeared in the dowager's morning room, a great gilt thing carried in and hung by 2 puffing footmen under Lady Sabine's smiling direction, set upon the one wall Eleanor could not read facing away from. The room was so very dim, she explained to the air, all sweet concern, when Eleanor came in and stopped short at the sight of it. It wants light most dreadfully. A good glass will double whatever candles there are, everyone knows it. You will thank me for it, my dear. I am quite sure you will. And so Eleanor read the dowager's morning letters to her own reflection thrown back at her twice its size, the burned cheek doubled and lit, and she made no answer at all, and turned the ruined side of her face very slightly away toward the window, and Lady Sabine sat with her needlework and watched her do it, morning after morning, with the small settled contentment of a cat that has at last discovered the exact cupboard where the bird is kept. There were other small means. A word about Eleanor let fall to a visiting neighbour, overheard on purpose, across a quiet room. A pointed public kindness, offered before company in the drawing-room after dinner. "Do let me lend you one of my veils for the assembly next week, my dear. There is truly no shame at all in it. So many afflicted persons find them the greatest comfort in a crowd, so that the shame Eleanor had never once spoken aloud in her life was named for her." And lifted up, and pressed kindly into her hands like a gift, in front of 8 seated people, who all found somewhere else to look. Eleanor weathered it. She had weathered a great deal worse than this, at grander tables, from women who at the very least had the honesty of their coldness, and did not dress it up as care. But it wore at her the way slow water wears at stone, and she felt the old habits closing over her again like cold water closing over a thing that has been dropped into a well, felt herself choosing the shadowed chair once more, turning the ruined cheek away once more, dimming herself, dimming, and she hated above all that she could feel herself doing it, and could not for her life seem to stop. The Duke saw the whole of it. He spoke no word whatever to Lady Sabine, and Eleanor came in time to understand that his silence there was a far deeper and colder kind of anger than any words of his would have been, and it frightened her a little on the girl's behalf, though not, she found, very much. But he began to seek Eleanor out more, not less, as though he meant to answer the whole patient campaign against her with the plain public fact of his own attention. He asked her now to read to him in the library of an evening, as well as to his mother by day. He walked with her out on the moor when the light was low and slanting and kind, bracken labouring stiffly between them, and they spoke of nothing at all, of the rooks and the turning weather and a single remembered line of verse. And it was the nothing that undid her more than any grand thing could have done, for she had never once in her whole life been given the ordinary and priceless gift of somebody's plain, unhurried nothing, somebody's company that wanted only more of itself and asked for no performance in. Return. One low afternoon on the moor, with the snow gone blue in the hollows and the last of the light dying out of the sky behind the black line of the fells, he stopped on the path and looked at her for a long moment, with the cold wind pulling at his dark hair and the old white scar plain across his weathered face. And she thought that he would speak, and her heart stood entirely still inside her, and waited, and then old Bracken flushed a hare from the heather and gave chase after it with all the ponderous ruined dignity of his years, and the moment broke apart and scattered like a dropped thing, and they laughed and walked on. But she had seen it. She knew past any argument what she had seen in his face, and the knowing of it made everything a great deal worse rather than better, because it made everything suddenly possible, and possible was the one single thing she knew she could not survive, if it was shown to her and then taken away again. She learned something of him, too, that changed the shape of what she felt, on an afternoon when she came early to the library and found him already there, and he did not hear her at the door, for he was reading aloud, low, to no one, to the empty room, and it took her a moment to understand that it was a letter, old and much folded, and another to understand from the tenderness with which he read the boyish, clumsy sentences of it that it was the last letter his brother had written home before the field. She drew back into the passage before he could know she had heard, and stood a moment with her hand at her throat, and understood that the cold, shuttered Duke of Ellsworth carried a burned place of his own that no one could see, because he had learned, as she had learned, to keep it turned always toward the wall. The dowager, who missed a great deal less than her failing eyes might have suggested, took Eleanor's hand one grey morning after the reading, and would not at once let it go. "I have known that boy of mine for 35 years," she remarked to the middle distance, "and I have not heard him speak so many words together since before the war as he has spoken this fortnight, and every one of them has been in a room that also contained you. I am blind, girl, I am not a fool. The two are not the same thing, whatever that gold creature downstairs believes. Her dry old fingers tightened. He has been waiting a very long while for a reason to open the shutters. Do not, I beg you, be so frightened of your own face that you fail to notice you have become the reason. And then she let go the hand, and asked crisply for the next chapter, and would say no more upon the subject. But Eleanor read the chapter through a blur she was glad the old woman could not see. The thing came to its head at the 12th night assembly, which the dowager had insisted upon against her son's clear wishes, declaring that she would be dead soon enough, and meant to hear music fill the house one last time before she went into the ground, where there was said to be very little of it. The great state rooms were opened and aired and swept. For one single evening the chandeliers were lit, the whole blazing weight of crystal, over the Duke's flat and silent objection, and light fell for the first time in years into every last corner of the hall that had lived so long and so deliberately in the dark. The county came in its furs and its diamonds, and above all its curiosity. Lady Sabine descended the great staircase in gold silk, looking very like the answer to a prayer, and took up her place beside the Duke at the head of the room, to receive the guests as though the whole matter were long since settled between them, and it was understood by every person in that blazing room that the Duke of Ellsworth would surely announce his engagement before the night was out, because the mother had at last brought it to a point, and the fortune was sorely needed, and the girl was beautiful past argument, and it was, everyone agreed, high time. Eleanor had not meant to go down at all, but the dowager wanted her near, and so she went, in her one good grey gown with the mended cuff, and she stood at the very edge of the bright and crowded room in the deep familiar habit of the edge. And she watched the Duke across the sea of heads standing straight and grim in the blaze of the light he could not bear, his jaw set hard against the ache of it behind his ruined eyes, doing his plain duty to his house and his name. And she thought, with a strange and sudden calm that surprised her even as she felt it settle that she would go in the morning. She had saved a little. She would write to the agent at first light. She could not stay on in this house to watch him marry, could not read to his mother through the long mornings while another woman ran the halls below, could not walk out at his side on the moor one more low and kindly afternoon, and then be asked to hand him over with a curtsy. It would be a small and quiet leaving, dressed up neatly in a fresh letter of character, and no one at all would be cruel about it. That, she knew by now, was always exactly how it was done. Lady Sabine found her at the edge of the room, as Eleanor had known with a weary certainty that she would, for people made as Lady Sabine was made cannot rest easy, while there remains one small pleasure anywhere left ungathered. She came with two of her particular friends at her shoulder, and a bright and social smile upon her face, and she pitched her clear voice to carry to the little audience she had thoughtfully brought along with her. Miss Ashby. There you are, hiding away in the dark again, in the very corner. You really must not, you know. On a night such as this, with every candle in the house lit at last, it does look a trifle strange, a person creeping so about the edges of a happy room. People will begin to talk. They will begin to think you have something you wish to hide from them. A small silvery laugh ran out over the top of the words. Come out into the light, my dear, do, and let us all have a proper look at you at last. There now. Is that not a great deal better? We are all the very best of friends here. And she reached out, quick and smiling, and took Eleanor firmly by the wrist, and drew her forward and out of the sheltering shadow into the full white blaze of the chandeliers, and turned her, gently, gently, with a lady's soft and inescapable insistence, so that the ruined side of her face was thrown up bare and shining into the very brightest light in all the room, before the whole assembled county, and its furs, and its diamonds, and its long slow curiosity, and held her fast there in the light, and murmured, sweet as sugar, Do not be shy of us." The little group looked. A woman somewhere behind them drew in her breath. A fan stopped its slow beating, and Eleanor stood held fast in the very light she had spent 3 long years teaching herself to flee, gripped hard by a smiling girl in gold silk, with the whole studied cruelty of it done up so prettily that no one present could ever afterward have sworn that any wrong at all had been committed. And she felt the old black drowning come up cold over her head, and she looked, in the helplessness of it, across the bright and staring room for the nearest door. She found the Duke instead. He was already crossing the floor toward her. He came through the crowd the way a man walks out into hard weather, not fast and not slow, and the crowd parted before him without at first understanding why it parted, and his eyes were fixed upon Eleanor and had not once left her, and there was nothing whatsoever of cold in them anywhere. He came up to the little smiling group. He did not so much as glance at Lady Sabine. He reached out and closed his maimed left hand very gently about Eleanor's other wrist, the one that Lady Sabine did not hold, and by that hold he did not pull her away and back into the safe shadow, as every last instinct in her body was crying out to be pulled. He drew her instead the final step forward, fully and completely into the light, and he turned, so that he stood square beside her facing the whole of the room, the two of them lit up together before every soul in it. His own long scarred face laid bare in the blaze that he hated, and he waited, unhurried, until the great room had fallen entirely silent. "You are all of you looking at Miss Ashby." His voice carried without any effort at all into the furthest corner of the room. "Look, then, look properly, since you have every one of you paid so dearly for the privilege of coming in out of the cold to do it. This is Miss Eleanor Ashby. She was a governess in the house of a family called Harcourt. She went back into a burning house, up a stair that was already alight, for the sake of a child that was not her own, and she carried that child out of the fire without a single mark upon it, and she wears upon her face what the doing of it cost her. In the one place where a braver country than this one has lately shown itself to be, would have counted it the very highest thing standing in the room." He let his level gaze travel slowly over all of them, over the furs and the diamonds and the dropped fans. "I carry a mark of my own. You have all of you been very kind, these 3 years, about your care never to mention it to me. You may mention it now. We came by them in the very same way, Miss Ashby and I. We each of us went toward the fire, upon a day when the whole world was screaming at us to run from it. There is only one sort of person in this world worth the trouble of knowing, and it is that sort, and I find that I will not stand in any room, my own least of all, in which such a person is made to feel that she ought to hide away her face." He turned then, slowly and quite deliberately, to Lady Sabine, and he looked down at her gloved hand where it still gripped Eleanor's wrist, and under that plain look Lady Sabine let the wrist go, as though it had turned to fire in her fingers. "I think," the Duke observed, quite pleasantly into the ringing silence, "that the inn is still 7 miles down the valley. The road, I am told, remains good." No one spoke. The great chandeliers blazed on overhead. Eleanor stood in the very middle of all that terrible and searching light with the Duke's warm hand still closed about her wrist, and could not have found a single word to save her life, and the whole county looked upon her, and for the first time in 3 long years she did not turn her cheek away from the looking, because he was standing there square beside her, turning nothing at all away. And she discovered that she could not for shame hide behind a man who so plainly refused to hide. She got somehow through the remainder of an evening that she never afterward could clearly remember. She got herself at last up the stairs to the small room under the eaves, where the plain glass still hung with its face turned to the wall, and she sat down on the edge of the narrow cold bed, with a single candle burning on the stand beside it, and shook, quietly and for a long time, with everything she had not once let herself feel down below in the blaze of the light. She had been defended before the whole assembled county. She had been named aloud the highest thing standing in the room, and in the morning she would leave all the same, because a public kindness, however brave, was still not a life, and a man who could be brave before his neighbours might yet prove sensible before his ledgers when the music had stopped, and she would not stay under his roof to watch the brave thing curdle by slow degrees into the sensible one. She had packed already, in the grey of the afternoon. Her one bag stood ready by the door. She meant to be gone down the valley road before the house was properly awake. She heard his step in the passage a little after midnight. She knew it at once and past all doubt, the particular unevenness of it, the faint drag that the war had left in his stride and that no boot could quite disguise. She sat very still upon the edge of the bed and hoped against hope that he would pass her door and go on. He did not pass. He stopped outside the door, and there was a long silence in the passage, and then a single knock came, low and soft, as though he did not wish to wake the sleeping house, or perhaps did not wish to wake his own courage too fully before he had had the use of it. And Eleanor did the thing she had always done. She leaned across the small space and blew out the candle. She did it before she had in any way decided to do it. It was the oldest reflex she owned, older by far than thought, the small and merciful dark that she had drawn about her ruined face 1,000 times and more, so that no one need ever be made uneasy by the sight of it, so that she might be only a voice in a room and never a wound, so that whatever was about to happen to her in the next moment might happen to a shape in the shadow and not to the bright shining pull of the scar down her cheek. She sat in the sudden thick black with the grey smoke of the snuffed wick threading upward past her face, and she spoke toward the door, in a voice she held level by the pure exercise of will. "Come in." The door opened. She heard him step into the dark of the room and stop just within it. She heard him understand the dark, and understand too the whole reason that the room was dark, for she had never once in all these weeks had to explain her shadows to this man, and she did not have to explain them to him now. There was a long silence, and inside it she could hear him breathing, slow and even, and she thought, with the very last of her long-practised defences gathered around her, that this after all was best, that they could say whatever there was to be said here in the merciful and forgiving black, where she was only a voice, and then in the morning she could go, and carry the whole memory of him away unspoiled by the sight of his face changing in the light, because his face could not change if he could not see hers. She heard him move. She heard the small blind sounds of a man searching an unfamiliar dark room by touch alone, the brush of a hand along the mantel-shelf, a soft knock of knuckle against wood, and then the dry scrape and click of a tinder-box found and taken up, and she understood exactly what he meant to do a full instant before he did it, and she spoke quick and low into the dark. No, please, but he had already struck the light. The candle caught. The little new flame stood up tall and wavered and then steadied itself, and it threw its warm and growing glow out into the room, and the light fell full upon her. Upon the burned cheek she had turned by instinct hard toward the deepest shadow, and there was nowhere left in all the small room to turn it, because he had come around the foot of the bed to stand before her, and he had lowered himself slowly down until his own scarred face was level with hers in the small trembling light. Close, so close that she could see the old white seam of the sabre laid open clean across his brow, and his eyes, which were dark and steady and held no flinch anywhere in them at all, and he was looking directly at her ruined cheek, openly, the way she had never in 3 years let one living soul look at it, the way she had turned mirrors to face bare walls precisely to prevent. And he did not look away, and he did not soften it into pity, and he did not so much as blink. "I lit it because I wished to see you." His voice came very low. "I have wished to see you since the first night in the library, when you turned your face away into the dark before you had even had the time to decide to do it, and I thought, there is a person who has been taught the very same lesson that I was taught, and taught it just as wrongly as I was. You have spent 3 years teaching every soul around you that your face is a thing to be spared them. An unkindness you owe it to the world to hide. I will not be spared it. I would count myself the poorer man for every single hour of you that I was made to spend sitting in the dark. He lifted his maimed left hand slowly, so slowly that she might a dozen times over have stopped him, and when she did not stop him he laid it, open against the burned side of her face, his ruined hand cupped against her ruined cheek, warm. And entirely without any horror in the touch of it, cradling the very thing she had spent the whole of her adult life hiding away as though it were instead the finest and rarest thing that he had ever in his life been given leave to hold. There now, he murmured, "You see. Nothing at all has happened. The world has not ended. The house still stands. And I am still here." Eleanor found that she was weeping, without any sound, the tears running warm and steady down over the back of his hand, and she had not wept before another living soul, not once, since the night of the fire. "You are to marry Lady Sabine." She forced the words out somehow. "The house. The roof. The debts. You must. It is all arranged. It has been arranged for years. I am going in the morning. I have already packed my bag. You must let me go. I cannot stay on in this house and watch you. I will let the roof fall in upon my head first." He did not raise his voice. "I will let every last rook in the whole of Yorkshire come and nest in the open ruin of it. I have spent 3 winters shut up in the dark of this house, because I could not bear to be looked at, could not bear the pity or the curiosity or the careful glancing away, and I came home from the war, and I closed the doors, and I decided quietly that I was finished, that a scarred and half-broken man had no earthly business wanting anything that lived out in the light. And then my mother's frightened new reader came down to the cold library at midnight and lit a single candle and turned her poor brave face away from me in the dark, and I watched her do it, and something in me that I had long ago given up for dead stood all at once upon its feet, and would not, for anything I said to it, lie back down again. His thumb moved once, gently across the ruined skin she had hidden for so long. I do not want the fortune. I do not want the golden girl downstairs who believes that a face is a thing a person can rightly be shamed by. I want the woman who went up the burning stair. I have wanted her, I think, since the very night that she stood in my doorway and thanked me for a candle. Do not go in the morning, Eleanor. Stay, marry me. Let me light it every night for the whole of the rest of our 2 lives, and never once again leave you sitting alone in the dark." She could not answer him with any words. She turned her face instead, the whole of it, the ruined side and the smooth side together, up into the small warm candlelight and toward him, freely and on purpose, and for the first time in 3 years she turned her scar toward another human being rather than away from one, and she let him see the entire truth of it, and she watched his face with her own bare and streaming while he saw it, and found written there nothing in the world but a fierce and quiet and settled gladness, and that was her whole answer, and he understood it perfectly, and he did not need it said. He stayed. He drew the one hard chair to the side of the narrow bed, and he stayed the whole night long, not touching her again beyond her cold hand held fast between his 2, the maimed one and the whole one, the pair of them talking low and unhurried in the small gold circle of the light, until the window grayed slowly toward a dawn that Eleanor no longer had the least intention of leaving by. And when the first candle guttered and drowned in its own wax, he lit a second from the stub of it, and when the second burned down he rose and found and lit a third, so that the small room under the eaves where the looking-glass had hung so long with its face turned to the wall was never once left dark again, until the winter sun came up at last over the white shoulder of the moor and made all the candles unnecessary. Lady Sabine and her mother left the following morning, before the family had come down, and the 3 trunks went with them into the 2 waiting carriages, and the 7 miles of good road to the inn were travelled. One may safely leave it to the imagination, in a silence of a very particular quality. The dowager told the entire tale by Mrs. Ferris, with a very great deal of relish over her morning chocolate, sat bolt upright in her chair and turned her clouded eyes toward the window, as if she could follow the carriages down the drive, and was glad in her whole fierce old heart to see the back of them. "I judged that girl entirely by her breathing on the very first evening," she declared to the room. "She breathed exactly like a person standing in a strange house and counting up a room's worth of its silver. And your Miss Ashby breathes like someone who has been holding her breath for years on end and has only lately remembered that she is permitted to let it go." She put out her hand, unerring across the space, and found Eleanor's and gripped it hard in her dry old fingers. "You will call me something other than your Grace before this week is out, my girl, or I shall be very much put out with the pair of you. I have wanted a daughter in this house for 30 years, and I have had until now to make do entirely with the Rookes, and I find at my age that I am no longer inclined to be patient about it. They were married in the spring, in the small grey stone church at the foot of the valley, with the moor at last coming green above them, and the witch hazel long since given over to the gorse and the first bright winds. And it was a quiet wedding, for neither the one of them nor the other had ever had the least use for spectacle. The county came, and the county looked, and Eleanor walked the length of the aisle with the whole of her face turned openly toward the light falling in at the tall plain windows, and did not once, from the door to the altar, turn her cheek away. And if there were those among the firs who had to arrange their features carefully at the sight of her, then that was their own labour now, and no longer in any way hers to carry. The Duke waited for her at the front of the church with the old white scar plain across his weathered face, and Bracken sitting in gross impropriety at his heel, the dog having refused with the whole ancient force of his stubbornness to be shut out of a thing so clearly important, and when Eleanor reached him at last he took up both of her hands in both of his, the way he had done on that first night, and he looked at her exactly the way he had taught himself to look at her, which was simply, and openly, and entirely. And the county saw that too, and some of them, the better sort among them, understood at long last the thing that they had spent a whole winter failing to see. Ellsworth Hall became a different house after that, though the change came into it slowly, the way the green comes slowly into the moor, and cannot be marked in any single hour. The great chandeliers were not lit every night, for the Duke's eyes remained the Duke's eyes, and the full blaze of the crystal still cost him more than it was worth. But the shutters came back from the tall windows one room at a time across that first year, and lamps with soft frosted shades appeared quietly where there had only been dark before, and the footman in time forgot the trick of finding the stairs by touch. And in the small room under the eaves, which was kept now not as a servant's bedroom, but as the Duchess of Ellsworth's own morning room, where she answered her mother-in-law's correspondence, and no one else's, and kept the good hours for herself, Eleanor took the plain wooden-looking glass down at last from the wall where it had hung so long, with its silvered face turned into the plaster, and she turned it round in her 2 hands, and she hung it up again the right way about, facing out into the room, facing the light from the window, and she left it so. She did not, even then, spend any great deal of time before it, but it faced the room. That, in the end, was the whole of what she had needed all along, and had never in 3 years found the way to give herself. Someone had first had to come into the dark and light the candle, and stay. On winter evenings ever after, when the moor lay white again from wall to wall, and the rooks turned their same slow patient wheel over the old chimneys, and the wind leaned its whole shoulder against the ancient house, the Duke and Duchess of Ellsworth would sit together in the library beside a fire that was always lit now, with a very old grey deerhound stretched groaning and twitching across both their feet at once, and there would be always a single candle burning upon the small table set between their 2 chairs, in a place where no draught from the door could reach it, kept alight the whole evening through for no reason that either of them ever troubled to explain to a servant, and neither the one of them nor the other ever once put it out. There is only the one sort of person in this world worth the trouble of the knowing. They had each of them gone toward the fire upon the day the whole world stood screaming at them to run the other way, and had come away carrying the mark of it, and had been taught ever after by the world that the mark was a shameful thing, to be turned always toward the wall. It had taken them the better part of 2 half-ruined lives to learn between them that it was, instead, the exact and only thing by which they had first known each other in the dark. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.